the White House, if you remember, when Yeltsin bombed the parliament in 1993, that's what that battle was all about. It was all about how property was going to be divided up. It was an extremely wealthy country, and the question was this going to be the program promoted by Chubais and Young Reformers, backed by USAID, backed by us, which was going to create a small oligarchy class, or was it going to be something that was going to put shares in the hands of the workers and sort of the masses and create a much more equitable system that's been used in some other countries? And Russia Russia took the extreme neoliberal path, and it eventually came to a head because the parliament resisted it, and so Yeltsin bombed the parliament, and we backed it. We actually extended him billions of dollars of aid right after he bombed the White House.
I'm sorry, because we're up past our agreed time here, but can I keep you on? Because I still have more questions.
Sure.
I don't want to, if you have to go, I understand. Well, tell me about those other countries, because unfortunately I have my anecdotes have all fallen apart because I can't remember what country I'm talking about anymore, but I had a next-door neighbor who was in the Peace Corps who went over to Eastern Europe right after the fall of the Soviet Union, and it was Latvia or Estonia or one of those countries, I think, where what they did basically was they took, everything had been communist, state-owned property, but what they did was they sold shares to everyone, and they put a limit on how many could be bought. They fixed the price real low so that, pretty much everyone could afford to buy at least some shares in all the formerly state-owned property. And somehow they had a regime that actually enforced those contracts and enforced those certificates, and you had the local townspeople ended up owning the school district, owning the factory that they all worked at, et cetera, et cetera. It would be like if you asked Ludwig von Mises, how do you go from a communist society to a libertarian one? Not Ayn Rand, but ask Mises. This is probably, what he would recommend, something like this. And according to my neighbor, the former Peace Corps guy, it worked. Can you tell me, is that what you're talking about?
Again, it worked because to apply a model that might work in the Baltics, where the countries, they're tiny countries of 1 or 2 million people with an historical consciousness where the people place themselves, in the Western European tradition. So what might work there with that kind of culture and history and mindset is not at all going to work in a place like Russia, which spans 11 time zones, has enormous amounts of, assets. I mean, incredibly wealthy. Just Norilsk Nickel, for example, just one company, controls 1/3 of the world's nickel and 70% of the world's palladium. That's in Russia. Latvia, Estonia, none of these countries have anything like that. Gazprom has 1/3 of the world's natural gas reserves. So, there was a lot less at stake with a different culture and a different history. But I think we did try to push on Russia a policy that that the government and the IMF sort of thought was working okay in Poland, which is, mass privatization, firing, downsizing, opening up markets, etc. But the Poles, as far as I know, they, after a couple of years of it, it was so incredibly unpopular and it was impoverishing so many people that they turned around and really softened the economic changes and the shock therapy, and voted in different people. But they, again, because culturally and historically, it's not as violent and brutal of a country as Russia. They had a somewhat functioning democracy with different political parties that genuinely had a chance. Yeltsin ruled as a dictator. A lot of the decrees that Yeltsin signed in the 1990s, some of them were written by his American advisors, some of these economic decrees. The parliament was completely ineffectual. So I guess what I'm saying is that the situations were just so different. There was so much more at stake in Russia. There's such a completely different history and culture and consciousness that you couldn't apply what worked in a little Baltic country to Russia.
Although, like you said, the way that they did do it couldn't have been worse. I mean, they really did. We look at, the Pinochet model. That guy was a fascist. That's not libertarianism to have a decree that all of this formerly state-owned property now belongs to these 10 oligarchs.
Yeah, no, it's fascism, exactly. It's And these guys, who ran things, they believed, as do, a lot of neocons and neoliberals, they believe that democracy should only be about the symbols of democracy and the trappings of democracy. If you hold elections, even if they're rigged, and if you have, a variety of opinions, supposedly, or a variety of newspapers or owners of newspapers, even if everything is bought off, then you can call it democracy and free press. But really what they think is there are only a few supermen who really know what the people need, who really know how the economy should be run. And kind of ideologically, these people, ran Russia into the ground. But these people had a very kind of similar, ideology or outlook on life. People like Larry Summers and Jeffrey Sachs and that ilk on the Western American side, and then people like Anatoly Chubais, Yegor Gaidar, all of the so-called young reformers and shock therapists on the Russian side. They all sort of thought, yeah, you need democracy, you need the trappings of democracy, a vote every 4 years, but rig it. But in reality, we know what's needed, we know what's best. I mean, a lot of Russians called these market reformers, young reformers, they just called them Bolsheviks. From their eyes, it was the same thing as the Bolsheviks, a small elite controlling everything and holding phony elections.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again,
what changed was Putin eventually turned against the West, and now we demonize the hell out of him and make him out to be Hitler and Stalin and every other boogeyman.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to get a Cold War going. But, we created this guy. We put him there. And the reality is, if he was acquiescent to what we were doing around the world, if he let Chevron buy out, his oil companies, we'd be touting him as this great, Peter the Great of Russia with a few flaws.
Right, yeah, no doubt about that. And, this gets back to what we were talking about the missile defense and reason for hope is, what you described there sounds a lot like America more and more as we become like Russia. And I know that sounds kind of hyperbole in a sense, but we do have a Military Commissions Act. And, we do have a theory of plenary powers in our presidency and all these kinds of things. Seems like we ought to be best buddies with them. And my favorite example, of course, is the American media, which I guess is more sophisticated than the Soviet media, if only because they have the feedback mechanism of pricing and all that, and probably more criticism from the outside. But I just wanted to share with you from Glenn Greenwald's blog here. He's a block quoting the Washington Post. I forget if it's Dana Priest or Dana Priest. There's two different. There's a Dana and a Dana over at the Post. Anyway, so it's an exchange with the live chat with the Washington Post audience. And a question from Evanston, Illinois asks, hey, Dana, why does McCain keep saying that Russia committed unprovoked aggression against Georgia? Nobody outside of America believes that. Why won't anyone call him out on that? And Dana Priest answers, the person who would need to do that is Obama. And he doesn't do that, or a lesser version of that, because I suspect he does not want to look weak vis-a-vis a resurgent Russia. Okay, so never mind that point. She's absolutely right about why he doesn't want to give McCain a talking point. That's obvious. But what I want to focus on is it's Obama's job to tell McCain that he's wrong about something. It's not the job of a reporter listening to this to follow up and say, well, wait a minute. Are you saying that there was not an attack against Ossetia or what?
Yeah, I think his point is well taken, but he leaves out a lot of his papers. The Washington Post really, along with the Times, but even more so the Post, took the lead in creating this false narrative that Russia invaded unprovoked because Russia is evil. I mean, just a couple of days ago, I forget her name now, Moskalenko, that a lawyer for Anna Politkovskaya, a Russian lawyer for Anna Politkovskaya, she was in Strasbourg for a human rights court trial, and she's a Russian lawyer, human rights lawyer, and she was apparently poisoned. This was last week, and they found a bit of mercury in her car. So immediately Fred Hyatt, the opinion page editor of the Washington Post, comes out with yet another in a series of insane op-eds saying that even though evidence is not in, it's pretty clear we can already say that, Putin